While desolate and barren, few could deny that the slowly rolling plains of rural Nebraska weren't beautiful, if perhaps when captured in the right light. This wasn't the right light. Prairie grass as tall as a man swung and broke in the searing wind. The dark night sky was lit with an infernal red glow, and screams unable to be replicated by any natural beast split the air, barely audible above the raging inferno. 500 acres of grass and shrubland went up in flame, but the smoke and sparks caused no fear to Quick Response Team Gunslinger of the Occult Response and Evaluation Organization, as our modified expeditionary fighting vehicles rumbled at 50 miles per hour over the ash and soot fields around the current burn line, 8 treads kicking up long fishtails of dust in their wake. The vehicle rumbled beneath me, causing the perpetually too tight chest harness of my wireframe to chuff a bit. Normally, this was alleviated by my body glove, a sort of rubber fabric compound underlayer that provided a final line of shock-absorbing defense from the elements of my own armor plating, but the last engagement had seen a bit of semi-liquid infected animal matter dribble down onto. Had to take the entire thing and burn it, couldn't risk spreading the prion disease. While I might be entirely immune to the red strain prion, the normal humans I was in close contact with sure as hell weren't. As such, staring into the tan wall of the rolling fortress, I began to feel the adrenaline wear off and instead be replaced with a tinge of annoyance. My handler, a heavily built big guy from Bronx by the name of Henry, picked up on me, raising a brown eyebrow and grinning like an idiot. "Got your tits in a twist?" I nodded and grinned, even if you couldn't see my slightly too sharp pearly weights beneath my helmet and gas mask. Yeah, it turns out that if you try to engage in melee combat with a pre-int composite, you get a little bits of it in your business, and then you need to burn said business. He just shook his head and laughed. "Yeah, I know, I was there. And I specifically told you to avoid closing with the Reds." "No can do, Captain. If someone didn't give that thing a target, it would have broken through the burn line and become Grand Slam's problem." The aptly named Grand Slam was Orio's Heavy Combat Unit, a full battalion-sized force equipped with heavy weapons, armor, and enough officially retired combat vets to cope in a small nation. While they were sometimes derided by QRTs of the organization as being the normals and conventionals, the ribbing was mostly friendly. After all, while amazing supernatural power was often sufficient, the few times it wasn't made you wish for 155 mil Hotweiser support, the Grand Slam was our fairy godmother of firepower. "What, you jealous cause they got bigger guns than you?" I grumbled. "No, I'm jealous because they have done a full half of the deep cleaning before we even arrived." Normally, Grand Slam was the final blow, the anvil to our hammer. They were bulky, slow, and all the other things associated with conventional formations, even if by regular military standards they were able to move faster than a greased cheetah on speed. Which is probably why their commanding officer, one Naomi Yamashiro, was extremely giddy when she had been the one to call us in this time. Turns out the entire unit was on large-scale practice maneuvers when one of Orio's many watchdog agents had called in frantic report from some poor Nebraska park rangers who stumbled upon something indescribable. Lacking the firepower to handle the infection themselves, the park guys had immediately requested for a nearest unit, which so happened to be the Grand Slam. 30 minutes and several hundred incendiary shells later, we had been called in to help pick off any groups of infected wildlife trying to escape the burn cordon. 40 minutes after that was now. "You rather the prion was allowed to spread?" I sighed. "Didn't say that. You know I hate this stuff as much as the next girl with brains." He laughed. "Yeah, despite the fact yours is a distortion engine." I snapped back jokingly. Henry was the type of man who was hard to actually get angry at, and I was the type of woman to enjoy verbal barbs. "And yet you, fully brained, have but a small fraction of my wit and charm." He just waved me off. "Enough jokes. We are here." Got a flock of what seems to be infected waterfowl, trying to make a cohesive effort to break out of the smoke. Grand Slam has already moved a pair of anti-aircraft vehicles and a microwave emitter up to intercept a few hundred meters past the burn line, but would rather avoid needing to torch that much more prairie. Time to get to work. We were spread pretty thin, with QRT-2 off as a show of force for some business in Colorado and QRT-3 half a globe away chasing down some cryptids in the Australian outback. As such, the members of QRT were assigned to each handle a section of burn front about a kilometer wide, responding to any breakouts with immediate lethal force. Despite our cavalier attitude, we all knew exactly how dangerous the red strain was. We weren't capsai after all. Even counting the non-left-hand assets, we barely had 50 supernatural individuals to our force roster, many of which were elsewhere or unable to properly counter the reds better than a normal human. As such, it was down to my curvy ass to handle this swarm of horrors. I stood up, ducking slightly to avoid grazing the top of my helmet rig on the roof of the hall. While comically large for fighting vehicles, one of their many reasons for cancellation in public military use, the expeditionary fighting vehicle was still an armored transport. I was a pretty womanly woman, standing at 6 foot 5 inches even outside of my wireframe. In it, my head came up to the 7 foot mark, while the top of my rigid frames and the backpack they fed out of easily got half a foot higher, even when retracted. As such, moving in close position was often difficult, and it was the only relatively cavernous interior of the EFB that allowed me to really wear full battle kit while in transit at all. 30 tons of steel and fire came to a halt, and I flicked on my augmented vision, swinging the pair of frame-mounted optics over my mask's eyelets. The rear door slammed open, revealing hell. The ground below the vehicle's tracks was scorched, little more than ashen soot. Wind whipped across the desolation, carrying with it the scent of fire and rot. In the distance, I could make out a raw wall of fire advancing across the plains, tongues of flame stretching into the sky as if to swallow the stars themselves. I stepped out, rising to my full height, optics compensating for the glare of the red light which bathed the area. Behind me, the electric door of the vehicle raised and slammed shut, and the EFV began to rumble away. I could barely make out the whine of its turret rotating to bring the mounted 30mm autocannon to face with the oncoming reds. Anastasia, we got the flock on thermals. You should be seeing them any second now. Looks like a few dozen. Largest thing there is maybe 50 pounds, but be careful. Over. Affirmative, engaging. Keep me in the loop. Over. I looked to the sky, the smoke a dull shade of grey in my night vision. With nothing but a thought, the mechanical frame I was wearing began to unfurl. Quartet of long, tungsten wires suspended mechanical arms stretching from my back. Each rigid frame was a pretty simple, entirely inert chunk of metal and cabling specially treated to resist extreme temperatures. I lifted the upper left arm, pulling it along on a wave of distorted matter. With invisible hands, I felt the surface, every crack, every tension-filled wire, and most importantly, the weapon suspended from the frame. Right on cue, the first fleshy nightmare blew through the wall of smoke, skeletal wings dripping with the red flesh. It might have been once a duck, but now was little more than a decaying, animated skeleton carrying a lethal prion disease. As such, it needed to die. I fired my raised weapon, 25mm airburst grenade, soaring to meet the creature. With a low pop, the creature and grenade vanished in a cloud of gore. Then came its friends, a literal cloud of stinking death. 2 more grenades sailed forth, fired by thought, matter distortion being used to pull the trigger on the mounted launcher. Each one burst within the heart of the cloud, sending bloody chunks of bone and gristle to the ground. I stepped back as the survivors dived on me, thin muscles pulsing with frantic strength. My lower right rigid frame extended and raised, a precise application of matter distortion pumping the hydraulics to spew forth a wave of liquid fuel, which was immediately ignited by a more powerful telekinetic blast that sent the resulting torrent of flame to incinerate the flock outright. I bent the air to form the liquid fire into a solid wall of death, grinning as the foul creatures vanished into ash upon contact. A large shadow fell upon me, and I leapt, springing back to avoid the mass of tendrils and meat that slammed into the ground. It stood, a hideous amalgam of what seemed to be a mountain lion and several dozen spirits of prey, all fused by red strands and rot. Red flag to gunslinger lead. I got eyes on amalgamation. Doesn't seem that rough. Engaging. Over. With a jerk of my hand, the suspended fire launched itself to consume the horrid thing. It moved unnaturally quickly, liquid spewing from a dozen of wounds as it squirmed around the wall of flame and leapt at me. I grinned. Both arms outstretched, I grabbed it with invisible, scorching hands and slammed it into the ground hard enough to shatter bone. It gibbered and screamed, then split like an overripe fruit to reveal a long tendril of sinew and muscle, tipped with wickedly sharp hook of bone. At speeds nearly impossible to follow, it opened a vicious slash that I stepped back from, the hook cleanly glancing off my chest plate, slicing the fabric overlayer and revealing the hard plate underneath. Instead of retracting, the tendril split into two, and both sickle claws swung for my neck as the terrible limb stretched. I blocked one with the rigid arm, the hook snagging on the barrel of my 25mm grenade launcher. The other I grabbed with both hands, allowing me to exert my true telekinetic power upon the creature. I yanked hard, using my mind as much as my muscles to rip the creature off the ground towards me, face first into my armored boot. With another burst of distortion, I ran the tendril from its frame outside, stepping down on its face, hard to slam it into the ashen ground. My lower left rigid arm swung, undermounted bayonet slicing the other tendril cleanly at its base. Kicking off, I spun in the air to land face towards the remnants of the creature, flamethrower already raised and firing to turn the squirming, crippled mass into a bonfire. Before I could radio in my success, Henry came over the radio. "Red flag, we have a major breakout attempt a few hundred meters down. Follow on foot and get in close. Over." I laughed. "Didn't you tell me to avoid getting in close?" Over. I could hear a tinge of frustration in his voice and sobered up. "We don't have a choice. The damn thing dug under the firewall and are spilling out. Grand Slam is already hitting a pair of other breakouts while the rest of Gunslinger have their own problems. Especially because we spotted a capsized chopper inbound on our position. Over." "Damn it. Fucking capsize. Didn't they know that this was our jurisdiction?" I turned to see the direction of the EFV began to thunder towards, south, the thickest section of the firewall. I wondered for a moment if the Reds had intentionally dug under that section, knowing that we would leave it the least defended, as the flame alone should have deterred them. Of course, I then remembered that all of the Red strain infected fauna had their brains gnawed into oblivion by the Prion. It was almost certainly a coincidence. The 30mm autocannon of the EFV began to speak its thunderous word, and tracer after tracer flew into a mount of black I could barely make out through the smoke and flames. Pushing with both physical limbs and my telekinetic might, I rushed forwards at a good 30 miles per hour. Normally, exerting myself like this would result in my calves being made comfortably toasty as the matter distortion heated the metal braces around my legs placed for this very purpose, but now, approaching the fire, I couldn't actually notice this above the sweltering heat of the inferno. The ground crawled with flesh abominations, several hundred poor deceased creatures that writhed and screamed. A small chunk of them were dead, blown to ribbons by EFV's cannon. But as I approached, the supporting fire stopped. We couldn't just hit them from a distance, risk them fleeing, risk something small escaping. If even a single mouse was to get loose, this entire nightmare would be restarted somewhere else. No, we needed, to put it crudely, bait. Living meat to draw them in, to make the entire horde coverage on one area so it could be obliterated. That was my job. "Hey!" My voice boomed, my jaw opening slightly too wide. "You want meat? Come get it!" They obliged, and the surface moved as one cohesive carpet of horror. I launched a trio of grenades sighting down the first few dozen infected animals. The rest continued, led by a horrifically mutilated wolf twice the size of a normal individual. The thing was scarred beyond belief, pulsating masses of infected flesh covering its chest and torso, mouth split open into a wretched snarl, spiraling tusks of misshapen bone glinting in the firelight. I put a pair of grenades on it and watched it stumble, immediately being trampled by its followers. Barely 20 meters was between me and the Crimson Tide when I slid to a stop, all four rigid arms extending, my two human limbs outstretched. Concentrating, I picked out the priority targets. A pair of infected hogs were telekinetically grabbed and crushed as if placed within an invisible pressure cooker, steaming flesh then used to slam into the legs of the horrifically deceased elk following them, sending it to the ground. The two infected coyotes went down to a burst from the .50 cal mounted on my lower left rigid arm, while the flamethrower roasted the collection of smaller critters as they scrambled towards me. My lower right rigid arm lashed out to bring its wire blade into a horizontal slash that decapitated the trio of deformed deer, but the things simply kept running. Adjusting fire, one fell to the .50, one fell as I distorted its chest into a pretzel, but the final one slammed home, breaking itself against me and bowling me over. Frame absorbing the impact readily, but found that this was all the opening that the stragglers needed. Engaging at this close of range left little time between contact and literal contact, but I knew that going in. Every creature ineffectually trying to kill me was one that wasn't making a break for it, risking the spread of the problem further. As such, when the skeletal rodents began to try to slip under my heavier plates and gnaw at my joints, I simply grit my teeth and ignored the pain as one managed to bite through the layer under my armpit, being rewarded with red, clean blood. With a glance, I peeled off its front half and tossed the smoldering rear like a bullet to smash into one of its comrades. I let loose a burst of napalm into the ground before me, before bending the flame to engulf my form. Brow furrowed, sweat on my face as I took care to merely lightly singe myself while sweeping away the horrors surrounding me. With most of the smaller creatures incinerated, I snuffed out the flame by burying the fuel beneath the black dirt, then used a rigid arm to slash the chest of the elk, which was now dragging itself towards me using a hideously distended, bone-spurred tongue. Another swung from the side, shattering its skull and rendering it limp. I looked up, searching for anything still alive. The wolf advanced, flesh raw and red, fur torn away by shrapnel. It howled in pain and rage, jaws splitting to open sideways as well as vertically, face opening up like a flower from hell. I sent a 25mm grenade down its throat and stepped back to avoid the resulting splash of ichor as its torso popped like a balloon. "This is red flag. Breakout liquidated. Over." Henry responded immediately. "Yeah, we got it. Cleanup is almost finished elsewhere. We got sweeper teams and helicopters coming in as we speak. The Inferno has entirely engulfed the quarantine area. No reported breaches in the exclusion zone." "Looks like we were lucky this time. Over." I nodded. Back in 2007, an infection thrice this size was discovered in the wilds of Alaska. Turns out that corporate entity, now defunct, was trying to study the red strain prion and so intentionally prevented local reports of the outbreak from reaching the local authorities. By the time anyone who actually knew what they were dealing with, which is to say us and the National Park Service, showed up, over 100 miles were contaminated. Spent the entire summer picking through the caverns beneath the region after the initial strike swept the surface clean via chemicals, agents and napalm. I believe we explained that one to the public as a volcanic eruption. Volcanic eruptions weren't usually followed by National Guard exercises in the same region, but whatever. I turned to return to the EFV when a sudden horrific pain split through my mind. For a half instant I wasn't sure what happened, but then I realized the feeling of hot discomfort in my left lower leg was gone. Then I fell face first, spinning around to find the elk thing had pulled itself open, neck splitting to reveal that its esophagus has now little more than a wet merely tube full of razor teeth. Well, razor teeth and scraps of flesh and fabric from my lower leg. I jerked the limb out of its mouth, wincing in agony at this merely stripped away what little meat remained. Still, I needed to gain distance, so I telekinetically hurled myself backwards, flamethrower raced to retaliate. I didn't get a chance to fire as the elk and my poor scraps of leg vanished with a disgusting crunch beneath the tracks of the EFV. Cursing, I forced myself up using my rigid arms to brace against the ground. "I am wounded. Nothing serious," categorizing as I speak. I winced as air distorted and trembled with energy. While unable to distort myself destructively, I was able to superheat the air around my tattered limb and thereby sear the wound shut. Fuck. The EFV spun in place, turret rotating to match its hole. "You contaminated? Over." "Yeah, pretty badly. Damn thing played dead, absolutely eviscerated my leg. I'm gonna be feeling that in the morning. Over." Henry replied. The smug bastard sounded like he was grinning. "Told you closing with them was bad news. Over." I grit my teeth hard enough to draw blood from my lip. With a shudder of effort, I began to force my flesh to knit itself back together. "Well, this time you told me to do it. Over." The EFV came to a halt. I reached up using my rigid arms to force myself off the ground and into reach of the handrail mounted above the tracks, locking my arms upon it and pulling my weight with a bit of telekinetic assistance off of my legs. The vehicle began to move, rumbling away from the now dying wall of fire. I watched as the glare slowly receded. Damn it. I'm gonna have to get my entire kit to get cleaned or replaced. This stuff ain't cheap, you know? Over. Henry merely chuckled. I would know. I'm the one who handles the requisition forms. But that isn't the issue right now. The issue right now is getting you ready to greet our guests, debrief, decontaminate, and get into some dress blues. Over. Right. Capsai. Damn handlers. By the time the EFB slid to a stop next to a decontamination truck, my leg had fully regenerated, pale flesh exposed to the now natural temperatures of high Nebraska fall nights. Which is to say, it was really cold. Based on what I felt, it seemed that the red had shattered the joints holding the steer pusher plates left-hand operatives used to telekinetically sprint without burning themselves, entirely ripped away the layer of fabric and soft armor encasing my leg, and taken everything in my left pant pockets with it. Damn rats. I hissed as the decon team sprayed me and the EFB with jets of pressurized disinfectant. As a pre and disease, the red strain was absurdly hard to kill. Only a few chemical compounds were rated to even stand a chance, and only if applied in vast quantities. Us left-hands were fortunately naturally immune, and after a bit of testing, investigations, and applications, had figured out how to train our natural defenses to target the prion. As such, the spray was more for my equipment than more me, as I began mentally feeling for the little shavings of deformed proteins that tried to squirm through my cells. With a thought, each individual prion was distorted away, obliterated utterly, leaving a warm sort of tingling to spread through my body, which nicely countered the freezing temperature of the chemical spray bath. Once we were declared clear, I dropped down and turned to face the guy in full hazmat suit mounting the chemical cannon. He hit me with a mock salute, which I returned, nodding and beginning to strip. The man turned away. I grinned, feeling the cool air strike my body as I shed my wireframe via both physical and telekinetic action, layers falling away. Unfortunately, there were no observers for any show I could put on. I desperately wanted to free my, now thoroughly chaffed chest, and the idea of giving a little entertainment was highly unprofessional. Even as one of the most unconventional government organizations, Oreo still had standards to uphold, especially if it meant being able to show up capsai. As such, I slightly blew away what bits of chemical soup coated my now naked form with invisible power, and quickly moved to a final sweep for any prion remnants. Finding nothing, I approached the truck, smile growing as the man in the turret occasionally glimpsed towards me, only to look away. Just because I had a lot didn't mean it wasn't the stuff he probably had seen before. Henry seemed to agree as his voice echoed from the loudspeaker on the EFV. Come on man, haven't you ever seen a lady before? Anastasia, get those clothes on and get to the tent. The red one. The field base was a thrown together thing, crash built by the Mud Skippers, Oreo combat engineering team often attached to Grand Slam. It consisted of perhaps 1 square kilometer of flattened ground bordered with a double perimeter of barbed wire fencing spaced 2 meters. Laser tripwires were set to automatically alert the guard towers on each corner. Really specially equipped turrets with an elevating platform that held anything from sniper teams to automatic grenade launchers. Knowing what killed Reds the best, it was probably the latter, probably with something nasty like incendiary rounds. Within the camp itself were several dozen parked vehicles, tents, portable shelters, and even an improvised runway for our air support. I opened a silver metallic crate marked "Spares for quick response team use only." Unfortunately, while much of the QRT was immune in some fashion to most contaminates, our kit was less so. Quickly stripping our gear and throwing on a new clothing wasn't exactly an unfamiliar occurrence, and to mark us as being something other than your normal human, members of the QRTs were given unique uniforms. In this case, it was the standard dress uniform, a sort of ceremonial but still somewhat practical getup consisting of navy blue pants, a shirt, and a coat or a jacket most comparable to those worn by officers in the actual public military. A fancy peaked cap hat and appropriate underwear for express gender completed the fit. I slipped into and put on the clothing quickly, smiling slightly as the chill of the night was replaced with the comfortable warmth of good dress. Of course, my own dress blues were specifically fitted to accommodate my body shape and were decorated with the emblem of Quick Response Team Gunslinger, my number and a call sign, and personal livery. The former was a stylized left-hand parasite, wearing a comically oversized cowboy hat, one stylized frontal spinal interface tendril swinging a whip, the other drawing a 6-shooter. The latter was one in red flag, with my own insignia consisting of a plain red banner marked solely with a white 1 held by a left hand upon a black shield-shaped background. Of course, the Oreo insignia was there as well, comically consisting of the literal cookie being used as a circular background rimmed on top of the initials of the organization. The only way you would even recognize if it's an actual Oreo was via the name and the slight white trim around the entire patch, and that last bit was stretching it. Ridiculous, sure, but intentionally so. After all, if you happen upon an insignia named after and shaped like a popular snack, the first thing to spring to mind would probably be some deranged marketing campaign of food and drug administration offshoot, not Black Project using supernatural individuals to hunt supernatural monsters. I heard a helicopter pass overhead, brought towards nothing but a slight blur against the black sky. Marked on its side was the icon of Capsai. Damn jailers. I took that as a cue to move, and waved at Henry's EFV as I began to jog towards the center of the camp. Soldiers belonging to both Grand Slam and other units waved as I passed and waved back. Spirits seemed too high, the rush of activity fueled by an energy granted by triumph, not the unfortunately far more common knowledge that if you didn't hurry, many people would die horribly. I picked out a few faces: Sergeant Adams, Lieutenant Harrison, Lieutenant Harrison's current favorite chew toy, Private Jenkins, who was caught trying sneak a peek at quick response team gunslinger while we were in the showers. Smiling, I specifically made eye contact with him as I passed, the young, nervous man shying away in legitimate embarrassment while his squadmates laughed at his expense. Unfortunately, I did not spot any of my own squadmates. They were probably already inside the red tent. Contrary to its name, the tent was actually the deployed form of mobile command center, a massive vehicle that resembled an up-armored semi-truck and trailer. Hydraulic supports anchored its unpacked bulk to the ground, and I noticed that the massive electric door that formed its rear wall was open, a flurry of activity underway inside. Auxiliary personnel scampered around, not unlike mice scampering for pieces of cheese, while the command staff of this operation stood around a large table dominated by a series of maps and radios. First to notice me was Naomi, her pale blue eyes flashing behind her glasses. Despite her height of perhaps 5'5", she dominated the room with an aura of intensity and raw willpower that few could match. Even as she looked up at me, I could feel her eyes piercing through my soul, evaluating the person before her with mild disinterest but predatory cunning. Red flag. Glad you decided to join us. Her family came from Vietnam, fleeing during the war, but Naomi was an American as they came. Fully naturalized, born in the USA and supposedly speaking English at level 2 years more advanced even when she was 5. She raised an eyebrow as she looked me up and down. You're intact, huh? I was told you suffered major damage. I nodded and grinned a bit by the looks on some faces around me. Naomi and her command staff were entirely unimpressed. Yeah, I'm getting better at the whole regeneration business. She scowled. Sorry, but I don't have time to talk. We have a big wig from Capsai Landing as we speak, and Command wants you to be part of the welcome party. Made sense. A sort of show of force, a subtle display of power, to let them remember that they weren't the only ones with eels on their side. Well, more under their thumb, but Oreo didn't play like that. Left unsaid would be, of course, that Oreo only got the sloppy seconds, even if I didn't exactly like calling myself that. As the single most powerful left hand we had, I was a one-woman army, a walking natural disaster able to level entire towns in minutes and face down conventional military formations measured in the dozens of hundreds of men. I was also absolutely nothing but a worm to be squashed compared to some of the poor monsters that Capsai had created and learned to point in a vague direction. We didn't use the same class system that they did, preferring a more nuanced and thorough view of left-hand abilities, but I knew I wasn't above a 4 by their standards. The rumors of what they did to their subject made my skin crawl, and the actual official documents shared as part of Hydra agreement made my blood boil with cold rage. They didn't contain monsters, they created them, so that they might produce an entity as physically powerful as they were psychologically cruel. But they also were a full dozen times the size of Oreo, had seniority and generally only didn't manage to squash us before we could establish due to lack of communication and ignorance as to our existence until 2 decades ago. Naomi fixed me with a glare. I don't like them either. Hell, if it were up to me, I would torch the bitch and then burn the nearest capside hellhole to the ground. But it isn't up to me or you, and we need to put on a good show. Give them proof that our way is not just morally better, but objectively more effective. Right, and one of our top agents, who also happened to be a left hand flying off the rail, would give the exact opposite impression. Everyone who isn't cleared for this, file out. The majority of the room left. A mousy man by the name of Simmons tapped at Naomi's shoulder. Ma'am? He simply spun around a tablet, displaying a black screen that flashed with white text.
UWU, I cannot be here in person, but I can be here in spirit, wink emoji.
That would be Gunslinger 5, my team's communications and intelligence agent. And she was a ghost. Well, technically not, her corpse body still moved sometimes, but she was right now projecting her spirit using electromagnetic spooky ghostcraft powers to manipulate the computer. Given she is already dead, Kelly didn't exactly feel bound by many regulations. This was hilarious to me and annoying to most other people. Surprisingly, Naomi loved it. She grinned, a slightly maniacal light appearing in her eyes. I noticed that she had pulled out her lighter, likely subconsciously preparing to flick it on and off to calm her nerves. But with Kelly here, the very literal functioning pyromaniac was cooled off in a less disturbing fashion. As such, the ornate fire starter slipped back into the coat pocket of her green camouflage field coat. Got contaminated. The computer glitched momentarily, the lights dimming before returning to their prior luminescence. Even with several years of practice, the ghost still found controlling her technology inhibiting or manipulating field a bit tricky at times.
No, I am simply en route, but will not arrive in time. Please tell Henry to mount tablet to head rate.
Naomi nodded. We'll forward it to him. Any other gunslingers going to appear in person or otherwise? The computer flashed.
No, Gunslingers 3 and 4 are preoccupied with decontamination. Gunslinger 2 is not allowed in contact with Reefanock personnel.
I frowned. 2 was another left hand. She was picked up half a year ago to replace the old 2, who was promoted to a desk job after suffering direct damage to her parasite that we couldn't fix. The new 2, who went by Mayday, was a Navy brat whose sister happened to be a left hand that blew off the handle. Reefanock got said sister, but she escaped unharmed but traumatized. A few months later, she accidentally popped a man trying to rob her like a balloon and was luckily found by one of our agents before they knew that she had slipped from their grasp. Mayday didn't exactly approve of Reefanock, least of all because recently provided documents told us that her sister was used in the field of several ops before being terminated for poor performance. Naomi sighed. Got it. So it's just you two and my boys and girls to create whatever manually they are throwing at us. She looked at me in the eyes. You are to meet up with Henry on the airfield and greet our kind guests, then escort them to this position so we can talk all formally. Corporal Simmons, hand red flag the comm tablet. He handed me the tablet, which chirped happily, causing him to jump a little. The air turned cold around us. Fear and acknowledgement seemed to reduce the difficulty Kelly faced when trying to directly impact the world via her disembodied spirit. I ignored the sudden chill and turned, leaving the command posts and heading towards the airfield. The maze of tents would have been hard to navigate if it weren't for a metaphorical beacon offered by a capsized helicopter as it hovered in place. That was odd. I could have sworn the helicopter already landed. The situation became clear upon me exiting the tangle of tents and stepping foot into the clearing which held the airfield. I was right. I had noticed the Reefanock helicopter landing. Well, correction, one of them. A fancy, probably freshly built UH-60M Black Hawk sat idle on the pressed earth, a small group standing next to it. Beyond the black-clad goons with automatic weapons, there was a woman in lab coat. Below the white flowing fabric was sort of a short red dress, matching the same crimson color of her hair. That would probably be the doctor. Henry, or as I would refer to him during this meeting, Gunslinger Lead, jumped off the back of a 3/4-ton truck that rolled by, dressed in his own dress blues, the tiny emblem of a hand holding a guidance flare looking almost comical on his broad chest. He grinned and nodded towards the Capside Freak Show. "Come on, Red Flag, we gotta look our best for this fine guest." My own smile was probably clearly only half legitimate, but that was intentional. It shifted quickly into my more classic, semi-infamous smug smirk as we approached. He took the tablet as we walked and handed it to Corporal Sams, one of the logistics girls who helped handle the day-to-day operations behind Gunslinger. He chirped, display probably flashing something absolutely the opposite of professional, but unfortunately I couldn't see it. Whatever it is, it made Sams giggle, and she quickly locked it to the helmet rig she wore, a modified version of those used to mount night vision goggles. Our trio advanced, and several conventional guys from Grand Slam joined on the flanks, loaded in combat armor and holding a mix of shotguns, flamethrowers, and even a microwave emitter. Standard anti-left-hand loadout. Not that conventional infantry would do much more than slow one of us momentarily even if we were unarmed. As such, the armament was intended to allow for deterrence and control of a situation, restricting the target's ability to concentrate and maneuver via overwhelming heat, clusters of projectiles, and natural human fear of fire to pin it down long enough for the infantry to run or bring up something far heavier. The other Refnok helicopter landed, its flank opening to let out. Oh, well, I probably should have seen this coming.
Ha! You know her?
Kelly's text-to-speech drawn out before anyone else could react. I ignored the prodding. Standing before us, slowly moving to stand at the doctor's side, was a girl. Probably only 17 at most, clad in a ragged medical gown, marked with a hazard symbol and a number, 45. She was gowned, dreadfully so, face pale and scarred, eyes sunken. From her back extended a series of hideous black coils rimmed with barbs, as if someone had shoved a full roll of barbed wire into her spine. The coils, all 12 or so of them, tracked on the ground behind her, loose and limp. That would be their left hand. A pit of fear and disgust, pity, empathy, and rage grew within me, so I simply closed my eyes momentarily, took a deep breath, then resumed walking. We paused around 3 meters from Capside Group, and Henry spoke. "Welcome to Field Base Alpha. There would be more of a welcoming party, but most of us are still a little busy." The doctor nodded curtly. Yes, the Prian. We saw the fires as we flew here. Very impressive, if I may say so." She smiled, a slight cruel bend to the way her mouth upturned, deep blue eyes flashing with legitimate interest that was only magnified as she looked our group up and down, stopping momentarily on Sam's, or rather, Kelly's tablet. "Interesting group you have there. This is the legendary Gunslinger team?" Henry nodded and gestured for her to follow. "Not all of it, but some of the major players. I am Gunslinger Leader. That is a Red Flag, our ground lead and heavy weapons. The tablet is being used to talk with Kelly, comms and technology." The doctor merely tisked, her own group falling in behind us. I turned, thankful to get 45 out of my line of sight, even if I could still feel the poor thing's eyes burning holes in my back. Left hands could pretty readily recognize each other once trained to spot the signs, but the more conventional explanation for her interest was the back of my uniform, open to expose my upper spine and the wireframe interface upon it. A quintet of interlocks for the exoskeleton to lock onto, helping me manipulate it if it was my own flesh. We reached the red tent to find it mostly empty. I couldn't help but notice that I didn't actually see anyone out and about on the way back to it. They had likely been pulled from this area. I wasn't exactly good for morale to let the conventions see one of Refnok's left hands. It was known that our organization disagreed on how to best use left hands and other supernatural entities, but the exact differences in treatment was only known to veterans of Oreo and those who needed to. It wasn't exactly classified or kept secret to the upper levels of Oreo, what Refnok did, but There was a sort of unspoken agreement to keep their sins on the down low. We entered the tent to find Naomi and Simmons flanked by their own pair of guards. Humorously, said guards were armed with grenade launchers, which weren't exactly the ideal tool for this environment. It was probably more a sort of psychological display, saying, "We know we won't survive if your pet freak goes rogue. But neither will you." Of course, it wasn't like a betrayal was at all likely. We had long gotten strong enough that Refnok simply considered it not worth the resources and time to stamp us out. My group continued past the maps and turned to face our guests, who stood across the table, stalwart and calm. Well, the doctor was calm, but I could see one of the guards nervously fiddling with their rifle. Naomi spoke. "Hello, Dr. Clear Dummer." I almost choked. Henry looked at me, eyes wide. Now, only one question was in my mind. Probably a very stupid one, but a question nonetheless. Luckily, I wasn't in a particular mood to bring it up. Besides, I knew who would do it for me. The tablet chirped, and the only vaguely feminine automatic voice asked the question of the hour.
No relation?
Dahmer smiled, a bit too amused by the question. One of her guards shifted awkwardly. No relation, even if I know the people who put him away personally. Now I must extend my thanks to Oreo for continuing compliance with the Phoenix Agreement and allowing my presence here as an observer and liaison. She gestured, and the guard stepped back, obviously nervous. 45 lurched forwards, stopping beside the doctor. This is 45, one of our most advanced and capable models yet. Henry clenched his fist. Naomi stared the girl down, eyes blazing like fire. Cute. Why have you brought along a pet? I frowned. Naomi was incendiary, even with the no doubt absurd amount of effort being placed into restraining herself. Henry took control, stepping to the front of our party. We have a left hand in the room. It is only fair if she gets her own. Dahmer's eyes sort of widened, sweeping the room in search of said left hand. I puffed my chest out a bit, stood tall and raised a hand. Gotta show that we actually gave our operative enough food to get meat on their bones, not like Skeletor looking chick over here. That would be me. Red flag, left hand operative of Gunslinger team. Her eyes locked upon my own, piercing my soul. She would find only inner lightning, as I smiled knowingly and matched her well to well. For a moment the standoff continued as she seemed to drink in all of the details, and my smile widened when she hovered on my chest a bit too long. Probably would be funny to tell her I was in sports bra or some other suggestive comment, but I was a professional. So I just wiggled a little bit and smirked, causing her face to momentarily cringe in a mix of confusion and probably half a dozen other things. Holding back laughter expertly, my poker face was legendary. I gestured with a bit of more silky smoothness than necessary to myself around chest height and spoke. I know I'm impressive in all aspects, but we have business to attend to. The body language of the guards was priceless, if only I could see their faces. Naomi was unimpressed. Yes, you are here for a reason, and we all have things that need to be done regardless. Dahmer shifted gaze to her, voice calm and controlled. Damn, wanted to ruffle her feathers a bit more. Indeed, beyond receiving documentation on the status of all left hands currently known to you, we would like information on recent operations involving their deployment and any future plans that may be of some significance to the security of the United States and their people. I could tell Naomi didn't like this, but neither did I. But it was the cost of Oreo being tolerated. While that is being done, I would like to actually speak to Red Flag specifically. Raising an eyebrow, I sort of glanced to Henry, who simply shrugged. No reason why not. A tinge of annoyance flickered inside of me. What the hell did Freakshow here think she was playing at? Still, my outward appearance remained the same. Sure, I will take you for a spin, show you the sights. Naomi frowned, and Simmons handled her collection of documents, which she slid across the table. We already have everything in order. Dahmer grinned and took them. Oh? I suppose you are known for efficiency, but it almost seems you are trying to get rid of me. Yes, we were. But we couldn't just say that. Kelly disagreed with that, however.
Yeah, we are. Frowning face with tear.
Naomi grinned a bit before returning to her scowl. The capsa group snapped their heads to the tablet on Sam's helmet rig as it continued to speak in feminine monotone.
Sorry, but we all know this already, unless it hurts your feelings.
Someone almost laughed, covering it with a cough. It was extremely funny that Kelly's text-to-speech would attempt to read out the tag of whatever emoji she tried to use. After all, the entire situation was pretty comical. I am sorry, but I do not believe we were properly introduced. Dahmer took this in stride, but I noted her eyes narrow with a bit of annoyance. She was probably insulted that Kelly wasn't at all taking this seriously.
My name is Kelly. I am a ghost. Spooky face.
Every light in the room dimmed for half a second. One of Dahmer's guards clutched their weapons tighter, while another looked around as if they were searching for some physical information. Right. Capsai wasn't supposed to be dealing with this sort of supernatural stuff, and probably kept the existence of ghosts, goblins, and specters of all sorts restricted knowledge only provided to the upper echelons. Dahmer's eyes lit up with a mix of legitimate wonder and curiosity. Oh, that is quite interesting. Would you mind if I ask you a few questions?
Yes. And I am about to be busy moving my body.
She leaned a bit further in, rolling on her heels. So, you can only be in one place at a time, or otherwise are restricted in the number of areas you can physically interact with. And doing this takes notable effort on your part. Conscious thought. Kelly did not respond. Instead, the tablet chirped and Sam felt at it. I turned slightly to see that it had shut itself off. I apologize for this, Henry explained, but spirits are often emotional, unconventional, and actively dislike being analyzed scientifically. Most of that was correct to some extent, but those familiar with her knew that Kelly was just salty she got caught out. No problem, I would expect as such from an entity with such a unconventional existence. Dahmer smiled. No, I suppose my business here is concluded. I noticed that Naomi was consulting with Simmons, the pair whispering while he occasionally stopped to listen to his earpiece. She called over Henry, and the trio took a moment to step away from the table and converse quietly, leaving the Capsai goons standing there confused. Well, not Dahmer. She was drinking in the surroundings, an analytical sort of gaze that promised that every detail was being considered and catalogued. Eventually, she focused on me and raised an eyebrow, then looked over to the trio in the corner. I shrugged. Probably got something from command. We stood like that for about 30 seconds more, and I began idly spinning a pen from the table in my telekinetic grip, watching as the plastic started to heat up and soften. I wasn't exactly a particular adept at contactless matter distortion to any real extent, hence the spinal tap of my wireframe. After all, compared to the monsters Capsai was producing, most of our stuff was small fry. Still, we like to think that we make up for lack of raw power with infinitely more honed technique. That and not being absolutely horrendous violations of the Geneva Conventions. One of the Capsai soldiers stared at the pen for a few seconds before intentionally changing his position to keep it out of sight. I grinned. Subject 45 stared blankly into the wall before a small flicker of emotion appeared on her face, and another pen began to lift itself off the table. Dahmer took note of this, as did a Capsai agent who began to raise their rifle only to be stopped with a simple glance from the doctor. The pen began to spin, just as mine did. I had mine begin to do a circle 8, then I placed it vertically and spun it like a top. 45 tried to replicate this, but halfway through, in silent dance, her pen began to crack and hiss. I noticed a very faint look of deep frustration, inner rage within her unblinking eyes that peaked when the pen popped, spraying heated oil across the table. 45 seemed to deflate from merely chronically thin to a virtual slip of paper and stepped backwards, face returning to its previous blank state. Dahmer smiled, glancing from me to her. Well, I see you're making friends. I shrugged, smirking. Got a few good reasons for people to like me. Henry marched over. A bit of frustration conveyed via the way he clenched the radio in one hand. Red flag. Command has something for you. He looked at Dahmer. You may go, our business is concluded. She chuckled. No, I see. What's in the rush? He ignored her. Naomi laid a map over the table, ignoring the resulting bit of ink stains. It displayed a nearby community, Pine Tree, an incorporated hick town out in the hills a few dozen kilos to the north. Had a pretty good little community, quaint but old-fashioned, I suppose. We occasionally went there for R&R. The look on the faces of my fellows told me that they weren't bringing it up for the local farmers market. She looked up to Dahmer, gauging her. Henry sighed and turned to begin pacing. Simmons hardened his gaze, matching my own. You want to stay, see how Oreo does things? Fine, we will give you that. Naomi looked to me now, a bit of fire in her eyes. As normal, of course. We have an ongoing situation of the left-hand variety. I frowned. This probably wasn't a good situation. Dahmer's grin widened. 45 shifted slightly. It appears that the left hand awakened and has begun to rampage through the town. From what we have gathered from first responders before they got fried, looks like this is a real shit show. Classic Carrie case. She sighed and frowned. Pretty standard stuff. Teen girl is ostracized, abused, that sort of thing. The cops knew exactly who it was immediately, and I feel that they were involved in some sort of shady business, but now she has killed 15 people and tossing cars at town hall, turning anyone she sees into a paste. Fuck. I felt my heart ache, my limbs tense. Damn it. Oreo did its best to avoid killing sapiens, and was willing to forgive quite a lot. Even if a left hand had confirmed kills prior to acquisition, we tried to give as much leniency as possible, sweep things under the rug if it was self-defense or the like. But this, even if Capsai wasn't literally right here, ready to intervene or snatch up the girl, this was too much to overlook, unless it was some truly heinous stuff going down to inspire the rampage. Dahmer clicked her tongue. Well, I suppose I had best stay to observe the situation and potentially step in if things get out of hand. She glanced at 45. After all, we have proper equipment for resolving these sorts of unfortunate incidents rather swiftly. I grit my teeth. Naomi actually nodded. Yes, we would like you to ride along, and hopefully, she smiled a cruel smile, pass on word of the prompt and clean resolution of the crisis by Creo. Dahmer smirked. I see. Petty inter-service power plays. You know, I personally think that you have some ideas that we should really look into adapting when it comes to policy related to left hands. I wasn't sure how to take that. She seemed to be entirely honest in saying this. Not a hint of deception visible, but I felt that was too good to be true. That there was something more, something left unsaid. I suppose this could benefit us both. Henry slammed his fist down, looking between the pair of women. Politics aside, the main concern is stopping the violence. Red flag, you up for it? I nodded. Yeah, get me in a wireframe setup for anti-lefty combat and I will end this solo. Still would prefer some backup. He glanced to Sams, whose face had gone pale. Tell her to get her rotten behind ready for action, and get Gunslingers 3 and 4 ready for ops. Lambtown protocol. Her face hardened, training kicking in. Hey, sir. With that, she turned and left, Henry looking to me. I cocked a grin and began to leave to Gunslinger's mobile supply station, but felt his hand on my shoulder. Dahmer is going with you to observe how we do it here. Make a good impression. I didn't let my distaste show, instead just gesturing for her to follow me as I began my walk from the red tent, noticing that people had begun to flood back in. Rand Slam probably wanted in on this OP as well, to offer support, and I wouldn't exactly say no to it. After all, standard Lambton tactics were to overwhelm and surprise the target, keeping them off balance to deliver a single fatal strike. Even if they couldn't really stand up to a left hand in prolonged combat, conventional units were loud, attention-grabbing, and carried a lot of gun. I felt the eyes on me, or rather us, as I led Dahmer through a network of tents and trucks, finally arriving at the mobile supply station, and it was pretty fancy name for a surplus HEMTT, a big type of standardized Army 8-wheel drive hauler truck. Ours was clad in arid camouflage, but was otherwise unmarked beyond a tiny Oreo symbol on each door to the cabin, simple blocky text spelling out Gunslinger above the grill. While externally it seemed to be hauling a standard shipping crate in the same drap as its frame, the mobile supply station was exactly what it sounded like, a veritable portable armory, housing all the equipment that Gunslinger commonly employed, from guns to ammo to gear. I went around the back and yanked one of the doors open before turning to make sure my tag-along was still with me. She and two of her goons were. Behind them rolled up a dented, freshly decontaminated EFB with Gunslinger's full roundel on it. Well, what bits of the roundel wasn't chemically seared away by the decon foam? That would probably be the rest of the Gunslinger team.